Peace be upon you, and Allah's mercy and blessings. On this occasion, I would like to briefly explain the sources of interpretation of the Qur'an. There are 6 sources for interpreting the Qur'an, namely the Qur'an, hadith, narrations of companions, narrations of the successor, the Arabic language, and deliberation and deduction. The first source of interpretation is the Qur'an. The first source of the knowledge of tafsir is the Qur'an itself. Accordingly, it happens very often that a certain point which is brief and requires explanation is invariably clarified by some other verse of the Qur'an. For instance, in the following verse of Surat al-Fatiha, "Guide us on the straight path, the path of those on whom you have blessed." It is not clear here as to who or those whom Allah Almighty has blessed. But, in another verse, they have been identified very clearly where it is said, "So, these are the people whom Allah Almighty has blessed, being the prophets, their true followers, the martyrs, in the way of Allah, and the righteous." Surah An-Nisa 69. Therefore, when commentators explain a Quranic verse, they first check to see if a tafsir of the verse is already existent elsewhere in the Qur'an itself. If such an explanatory verse exists, they elect to adhere to it as their first choice. The second source of interpretation is hadith. The words and the deeds of the Holy Prophet, upon him blessings and peace, are called hadith, and as it has been stated earlier, Allah Almighty sent him with the Qur'an solely for the purpose of explaining, openly and explicitly, the correct meanings of the Qur'an to people. Consequently, he discharged this duty with grace and excellence both by word and deed. In fact, his whole blessed life is, after all, a practical tafsir of Qur'an. It is for this reason that respected commentators, in order to understand the Qur'an, have laid the greatest emphasis on the hadith as the second source of tafsir, and it is in the light of hadiths that they have determined the meanings of the Book of Allah. However, because all sorts of narrations, sound, weak, and fabricated, are included in hadith, research-oriented commentators do not accept a narration as trustworthy until it withstands the principles used in the scrutiny of hadith narrations. Hence, simply finding a hadith report somewhere and then employing it as a source of Quranic commentary is not correct because of the very likely possibility that the report is weak or even contradictory to stronger reports. Without a doubt, hadith verification and criticism is a delicate matter, and venturing therein is the exclusive prerogative of those who have spent years in mastering this field of knowledge. The third source of interpretation is narrations of the companions. The noble Sahaba, or companions, may Allah be pleased with them all, had received their education directly from the Holy Prophet, upon him blessings and peace. In addition, they were personally present on the scene when verses were revealed, and they had themselves witnessed the circumstances and backgrounds of the Quranic revelation. Therefore, naturally, the recorded statements of these blessed souls are far more authentic and trustworthy in explaining the noble Qur'an. Hence, in the case of verses the explanation of which is not found in the Qur'an or hadith, statements recorded from the noble companions, may Allah be pleased with them, are given the highest priority. Consequently, if there is a consensus of companions on the explanation of a certain verse, the commentators follow just that, and explaining it in any way otherwise is not considered permissible. If the statements of companions, may Allah be pleased with them, differ in the interpretation, tafsir, of a certain verse, then the commentators who come later examine them in the light of various proofs and arguments and then determine which interpretation or explanation should be given preference. In handling such a situation, an important corpus of rules and regulations already codified under the sciences of usul al-hadith and usul al-tafsir have been developed, a detailed discussion of which is not appropriate here. The fourth source of interpretation is narrations of successor. After the companions, may Allah be pleased with them, come the successors, tabi'in. The latter learnt the tafsir of Qur'an directly from the former. Therefore, their statements too have great importance in the science of tafsir, although a difference of opinion among scholars exists on whether the statements of the successors are considered decisive in tafsir. Their importance, nonetheless, cannot be denied. Al-Itqan 2-179.
The fifth source of interpretation is Arabic. Since the Quran was revealed in the Arabic language, in order to accurately explain the Quran, it is necessary to have a complete mastery over it. There are several verses of the Quran for which there happen to be neither any attending circumstance of revelation nor any related juristic or scholastic question. Therefore, in their explanation, neither the sayings of the Holy Prophet nor the statements of the Sahaba or Tabi'in have been transmitted. Hence, the only means through which such verses can be explained is the Arabic language, and it is on the basis of language alone that they are elucidated. Additionally, should there be some difference in the tafsir of a certain verse, then also the science of linguistics is used to run a test of veracity between varying opinions. The sixth source of interpretation is deliberation and deduction. The last source of tafsir consists of deliberation and deduction. The subtleties and mysteries of the Qur'an are an ocean with no shore. Therefore, the more a person who has been blessed with insight into the Islamic sciences by Allah Almighty deliberates into it, the more he discovers ever new mysteries and subtleties. As a result, commentators do present the outcomes of their respective deliberations as well, but the mysteries and subtleties so described are found acceptable only when they do not contradict the 5 sources mentioned above. So should a person, while explaining the Qur'an, come up with a subtle point or independent judgment which is contrary to the Qur'an and Sunnah, consensus, ijma, language, or the statements of companions and successors, or stands in conflict with another principle of Sharia, then it will have no credence. Some mystics in the past sought to describe such mysteries and subtleties in tafsir, but investigative scholars of the Ummah did not consider them trustworthy because the personal opinion of any person that contravenes the basic principles of the Quran, Sunnah, and Sharia have obviously no weight. Al-Itqan 2:184. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully it can be understood well and can expand our collective horizons of knowledge.